When we came back from Desert Storm, we had all the right number of vehicles, but they belonged to somebody else because he had been stealing. I was like, wait a minute, we got 57 Humvees. I thought that's what was supposed to, but none of the serial numbers match. And he's like, oh, said come home with 57. We got them.
Welcome to the Defenders and Disciples Show. Today I'm joined by my good friend Rich Brown. Rich is a Marine veteran, author, and the co-founder of the American Warrior Society and the co-host of the American Warrior Show and the Across the Peak podcast. Rich was also a regional manager for disaster preparedness and government operations for the American Red Cross. Rich is a retired Marine combat veteran with over 23 years of service to our country. Rich also served as a corrections officer and special operations response team officer with the Knox County Sheriff's Department. Then he later transferred to a city police department where he served as a patrolman, defensive tactics instructor, and firearms instructor. In addition to being a distinguished graduate of numerous military and law enforcement schools, Rich holds belts in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, McMath, and several other martial arts. Rich is a published author with a Bachelor's of Science in Social Psychology, and in his free time, Rich enjoys spending time with family, drinking coffee, and writing. Rich and I discussed a variety of topics, including his everyday carry and travel security, his experience in the Marines, authoring and publishing his new book, his time working for the American Red Cross, emergency preparedness, the importance of fitness in self-defense and law enforcement, common myths about firearms, problems in law enforcement training and poor leadership, China as the biggest external threat to the U.S., as well as the biggest internal threats, and much more. And now I give you Rich Brown. Rich, glad to have you on the show.
My privilege.
Before we start, I'm going to go over some just kind of like icebreaker questions and we'll get the ball rolling. But are you ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. What book are you currently reading?
Well, as my wife would tell you, I never just read one book. I've got my
Same.
nightstand is full, brother. And my Audible is full too. So, but right now the highlights of what I'm reading, mostly Scotland-centric books. Like I'm reading one on the Highland clearances.
Okay.
I'm reading one on John Brown. He was a Highland servant to Queen Victoria, like his biography. I'm reading The Goodness Paradox. The strange relationship between violence and virtue is what it's about. Mm-hmm. And I think that's about it. The Sea Kingdoms of the Western Isles of Scotland. So
okay,
that's about it.
Brown, is there a relation there?
Yeah, man. We've been to Scotland 3 times. We've been to the little village that our ancestors came from on the Kintyre Peninsula. So, yeah.
That's awesome. You just got back from that trip.
Yeah.
Was that the trip? Yeah.
Yeah, that was our 3rd trip over there. Yeah.
Okay.
We
really
love
cool.
it over there. Yeah. Outside of some of their politics, aside from some of the wacky politics, it's a beautiful place to visit.
What was your favorite part of that trip?
I really love Edinburgh. It's probably my favorite city in the world. I mean, there's places that are more beautiful that I've been to, like on the Amalfi Coast of Italy, and some places in Greece. But I would say that I love Edinburgh, but we really love the Scottish Highlands. There's a little cottage that we stay on the Crennan Canal up there that we've stayed several times. Gotten to know the owners and stuff, and it is just heaven on earth, man. It really is. Beautiful, beautiful. It's interesting to, if you study your ancestry and you can fix a place and understand the politics that kind of pushed and pulled you out of there. Mm-hmm. And, for our ancestors, perhaps yours and mine and a lot of people that will be watching and listening to this, we weren't part of migration like we think of migration today. We were going from one British territory to another. It'd be like me moving to Wisconsin. I mean, it was the same sovereign, the same money in your pocket. Everything was the same. Just happened to be crossing an ocean, But other than that, yeah.
What's your everyday carry consist of? And if you ever find yourself in a situation where you have to use deadly force to defend yourself or to defend someone else, then you're going to want a good legal team defending you after the fact. And that's why I trust attorneys on retainer. And if you want to see how AOR compares to those other CCW insurance providers, then scan this QR code or check out my affiliate link in the description. They have individual and family plans so that you will be legally protected should you ever need to protect your life or someone else's life. And don't forget to use promo code DAD to save $25 on your initial sign up.
Evolutionary Paranoia and culture. I mean, seriously. In order to have a good sense of situational awareness and understanding the cultural context that we operate in, I mean, that by far and away, the 6 inches inside your skull from ear to ear is my number one EDC.
The Gift of Fear.
Yeah, man, absolutely. Gavin DeBecker's excellent book. And there's so many good books left to bang. But I say all that to say, as a podcaster myself and having asked this question, I don't ask it anymore because more often than not, it's a discussion about the tools that they carry on their belt. And we can talk about that if you want, because I certainly carry my share of tools. But when you go places like Scotland or Italy or you name it, right, they don't have the Second Amendment.
Right.
So you will be disarmed. But you're only disarmed if you think you are, right? And I'll tell you, man, one of the things that I carry with me, and I carry it everywhere, and I will show it on here, is this guy.
Oh, yeah.
I just went through, I thought, okay, Paris is going to freak out. I went through customs in Paris, yeah. But, this has a little added beauty here, right, Taylor? It can do other things. Didn't bat an eye at it. I mean, matter of fact, one of their TSA people took it off my bag. As soon as she touched it, I'm like, here we go. And she's, kind of handed it to me. I'm like, oh, thank you. And I carried an armored backpack. They didn't bat an eye at that in London or in Paris. When I'm here stateside, it's a Glock 45, Dawson precision sights. I like a wide rear notch and a fiber optics, very thin front. Striker control device to me is a must if you're carrying a Glock handgun, especially in the appendix position like I do, and a lot of people that will listen to us probably do. A really high lumens light, and that's something I've changed my opinion on. I used to carry a little Streamlight ProTac, but I've really come around to the value of high candela over time. Yojimbo too, and it's not just the knife. I've gone out to Marshall Blade Camp, 4 days up in the Colorado mountains doing edge weapons training with Michael Janich for years and years. So it's just another lethal force option, right? My car keys, my iPhone, I mean, all that stuff. But it's really more the set of skills that I've developed over my 55 years on this planet that is more important than any piece of kit that I carry in my pocket.
Yeah, I'm glad you answered that way because that was a good follow-up to that previous question with the travel. And a lot of people don't realize that, you can't always bring all the weapons that you have at home. And so, that whole, what is it, the one mind, any weapon, the Marine Corps martial arts motto or whatever. Yeah. So I completely agree.
When I became a close combat instructor in 1993 in the Marine Corps, that was our tagline then. I mean, that tagline, one mind, any weapon, may go back to the 40s for all I know.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That was that's been around at least since I went to CCI school. And, I, as a young Marine, I mean, literally 21, 22 years old, I was running around Europe carrying a concealed firearm on a PSD gig, and I didn't think anything of it. Now, as I go to Europe, I'm like, holy cow, that it's unheard of for that to happen.
If you could have dinner with anyone dead or alive, who would it be?
I don't know if your listeners will know who this person is, but Mary Margaret Phillips.
Okay.
And you're like, I have no idea who that is. That's
I was hoping you explain.
My father's mother, my mama. I mean, as we say in the South, my mama.
Awesome.
She was literally like everything, and one of the greatest women I've ever known. Of course, I've been married to my lovely bride, Miss Lisa, for 35 years, but, my mama was, the queen. Yeah, she was the matriarch of our family, and I miss her every day. It's even more bizarre because I look like her. So when I walk by the mirror sometimes early morning, I'm like, oh, there she is. No, it's me. But, yeah.
That's great. That's awesome. That's a good answer. I like that because sometimes people just pick like some historical figure or something, but the fact that you picked a a family member. That's neat.
Oh yeah, one more time, sit down, have coffee with her, be priceless.
Yeah. If you could master one skill overnight, what would it be?
Master one skill overnight. I would probably say flying commercial fixed and rotary wing aircraft. And it's odd because on the show that I do, my co-host is a captain of a commercial airliner. So he probably has no idea that I really envy his skill set to be able to just jump in the cockpit of a 777 and take off. But yeah,
What, you talking about Mike? Mike is?
No, Will.
Will. Okay. Will.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
He was on with, he talked about the travel security, didn't he?
Oh yeah, we have I don't know if a lot of people know what an FFDO is. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
Federal Flight Deck Officer. So we
Okay.
have a lot of members in the American Warrior Society that are FFDOs that are they're trained commercial airline pilots that have also been trained by the Federal Air Marshals, and they carry firearms in their cockpits. Now, you would never know who they are. The stewardess don't know who they are, but they have a firearm in their cockpit. So yeah, I've had some of those guys on, and we've talked about travel security and things of that nature.
Wow. Yeah, that was a good episode. Okay, so that you said learning how to or knowing how to fly a commercial airline like a 777 or something.
Yeah, fixed and rotary
Okay.
ring. I mean, I want to be able to. Things get squirrely
Fixed and
here.
rotary. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I'll go
Yeah.
and jack an airplane and get my family out of here.
I mean, it's kind of like learning a superpower, right? Because you're flying.
Yeah, and if you've read the book, I started flying when I was 16. I actually soloed when I was 16 years old, and
He's talking about this book right here, which we'll get into
hey,
in a
look
second.
at that. That's right. Yeah, yeah. So that is a superpower. My brother now is learning how to fly, and when my son moves back here from Albuquerque, we're all gonna, pursue flight together. And
Yeah.
yeah, because it's highly important. And some of the older planes that are on the tarmac, they're going to be resistant to an EMP or a coronal mass ejection or things of this nature because they function off magnetos. And so if you know how to jack one, you can get
Tactically
out of Dodge.
acquire.
Tactically acquire. That's right.
What if someone was wanting to get their license? How would you recommend going about that? Like, what's the best economical and then like time-wise process for doing that?
Well, there's some, experimental aircraft that you can literally go buy off Facebook Marketplace and kill yourself on a weekend if you want to. I mean, seriously, you don't
Oh
need
my
anything.
gosh.
Yeah. So there's certain aircraft like that, but the FAA come up with a really interesting thing. So there's probably the thing most people are familiar with is like a single engine prop license, kind of an introductory, but there's also a sport license, which requires less amount of time to get into aviation. But it's a commitment and one that I'm not really interested at short circuiting at this point in my life. Got a lot to live for at this point.
Yeah. Speaking of jobs and stuff, what's the most unusual or interesting job you've ever had?
I would say my most interesting and probably my favorite job was being a bouncer in the 90s. It really was because club culture that existed from, say, late 70s to the end of the 90s doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, it might be a pocket here or a pocket there, but it is not the thing it is. And you can thank the smartphone for killing that off, perhaps. I don't know. Other societal things may have come around that knocked its preeminence off. But, I mean, that's how you used to meet people. And it was a wild place to be. It was a wild place to work. It was an incredible combatives laboratory to learn what worked and what didn't, how to talk to people in that environment and talk them into getting to the door. It's similar. That I think you and I spoke about it before when I was a police officer, you were a police officer. I talked to more people in the handcuffs than I ever had an arm bar, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but that kind of communication, verbal and nonverbal, and if it did get physical, what did work? How do you operate in a team? And I see, not to take a tangent here, because I know we're just opening the door here, but when you watch police officers operate in a team, it is the what do they call it? The polyester pylon. It's just a mess,
Yeah.
right? If you watched Mike Seeklander and I operate when we were bouncers together, it was incredibly efficient 2-man takeout. I mean, we all knew what we were doing, where to grab, what to grab, and out the door we went and weave our way through the throngs of people like it was nothing. And I don't know why, I don't know why that is today. Why they can't figure that out.
Yeah, it's oftentimes in a police fight, you're often fighting the other officer as much as you're fighting the person you're trying to detain. And you have that one officer that shows up that either before the fight happens, they're the one escalating it and you're like, oh, we're about to fight. Or while you're fighting, you're like, what is this person doing? Like, what is their goal right now? I don't understand. I'm fighting them so that was always a challenge.
Yeah.
Sometimes it was either easier fighting someone by myself than it was with other officers.
Yeah, you don't know what they're going to do. And that was the thing with a floor staff, it's going to be the same group of 4, 5, 6, 8 guys, whatever the number of folks that are working is. And a lot of times we would meet up at somebody's trailer, right? And go over, hey, well, this is what happened last night. What's a good way to deal with that? And we would work our tactics together because this is before the UFC. And back then, you were taking a bunch of guys who were strikers and we're trying to morph together. Like, we're not punching anybody in a nightclub because if you're going to get sued, you're going to hurt somebody. We don't want to do that, right? So we're trying to do some form of stand-up grappling because I don't want to take them to the floor either. And even now, as a guy that's been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the last 7 years, I don't want to go to the ground, even though I'm very comfortable there. It's where I can use some of my old man stuff, to slow this thing down. But it's a stand-up grappling is what seemed to work best in that environment.
Yeah. Well, and also it works in jiu-jitsu because it's usually just one opponent, right? You're not worried about other people coming in and stomping on your head while you're trying to do an arm bar.
Yeah, I went to probably about a year ago. I went to Cecil Burch, good friend of mine. He immediate action combatives. He's I think a third or fourth degree black belt under Megaton Diaz. He has a school out in Phoenix, and he came to Nashville. I went to his 3 or 4 day course. It was fantastic, by the way. If you get the opportunity to train with Cecil, I highly encourage it. But I think I was the highest ranking guy of the students, so he had me like be the shark. And what he would do is, if you're grappling with one guy on the ground and you're not paying attention to your surroundings, looking up every now and then he'd be like, hey, get him, and I would just go over there and now you're fighting 2 dudes.
Yeah.
So if you were up and giving commands, hey, stay back, then I stayed back. But if you were sucked into that thing on the mat, here I come. Good luck.
That's good. That's a really important skill set to make people aware of. Well, let's talk about something else. How about we start off with this book here?
Literary masterpiece.
It should be in the Library of Congress. I mean, if I'm honest,
Probably should be.
On Violence and I'm gonna butcher this word. Varietals.
Varietals.
Is it varietals? Okay. On Violence and Varietals. This is a great book, guys. If I'll have a link in the description, and I encourage you to pick this up. It's just the way you wrote it. It's like having a conversation with you. I mean, it's just the casual tone. But and the way you tell the stories is so raw, and I love it. I mean, it's great. What is there a particular story in the book you would like to talk about the most? I mean, I'd like to talk about the whole book, but we'd be here for 5 hours.
Is there a particular story? One of the things that seemed to resonate with one of my good friends, Justin Carroll, was in 3rd Recon Battalion and then 2nd Force and then MARSOC. He said that the description you give of Camp Schwab, being on Camp Schwab and going to the snack bar, he said to me, man, that was the Marine Corps in microcosm. So, if you ever spend any time at Camp Schwab, you will know what the hell I'm talking about. It's a miserable place on earth. But just as far as the gamesmanship that they do with young Marines, and I spent 23 years in the Marine Corps. You know that. I retired as a Chief Warrant Officer, so I didn't do a 4-year one-off, and now I'm pissed off about the Marine Corps. No, I had an amazing career. I'm very happy with how it went down. But, that was just one example of how they treat junior Marines. And it's not what I thought going into the Marines, Taylor. I don't know what you thought, but I thought, man, once I get past boot camp, I'm part of the brotherhood. I'm part of the tribe. I'm going to be treated like an adult because I'm a Marine, right? And then you find out, oh, no. It's all fun and games here.
I actually boxed out a paragraph that you reminded me of that. I think this is what you're talking about. And I want to read this real quick. And I'll remind you, just a day ago in the Republic of the Philippines, I was allowed to go out in town on liberty alone, all alone, and stay out overnight as NPA Sparrow teams hunted and killed Americans, even one by the name of Rich Brown, which I thought that was crazy. Now, back on Oki, on a Marine Corps base with dozens of force protection measures and zero threat, the NCOs were playing the, quote, how to be a petty little prick playbook and playing it to the letter. It's so true. It's like they trust you with these in these other ways, and then all of a sudden you get back in garrison, and it's like, wait, what? What are we doing here? Like it makes no sense. It's so bizarre. And I don't know if other branches are like that, but I get the sense that the Marines are the varsity level of doing that type of thing.
Yeah. I think you're right. We're definitely not the JV at playing games with our troops. And what's interesting about that is as you move up the rank structure, and I was a gunny before I became an officer, so I did get an opportunity to spend about 8 or 9 years as a staff non-commissioned officer. I'm like, hey man, not on my watch. I'm not doing it. And didn't do it as an officer, didn't do it as a staff NCO. I'm gonna treat you like an adult until you prove otherwise, and then I'm gonna come after you. I'm not gonna mess with everybody. No collective punishment. You're gonna have a bad day.
Yeah.
Well, another thing that everybody tends to rise to that level of professionalism, right?
Yes.
If you treat everybody like children, guess what they do? They start breaking stuff, get their crayons out, and making a mess.
Eating crayons. One of the things you talked about too in here was the hazing that goes on in the Marine Corps, and it's so ubiquitous. And and the types of hazing in particular, I think would shock most people. And I was reading through the book, and it was reminding me of it. And even since it's been a few years, I was like, oh my gosh, I do remember that things they used to do. It's just absolutely crazy. Would put college hazing to shame. Or make it pale in comparison. Yeah. So I'm really glad you talked about that.
Well, getting jumped in by the vice lords or something like that, I remember watching like this is nothing, this is nothing. And I, having worked in corrections too, being in a prison, man, in some ways you're right at home. Being a Marine is no different than being a prisoner in a lot of ways.
Basically,
I'm not doing a good job recruiting people right now, Taylor. But,
hey, you're no longer a recruiter Brown, so it's all right.
That's true.
They probably could use you right now. They're hurting for numbers.
Yeah, they are, man. And there's, we can talk about that later if you want to, but they're getting their asses handed to them. Yeah.
What motivated you to write a book?
To be honest with you, man, I always wanted to. Even when I was a kid, the plan was I fell in love with the movie Apocalypse Now. Still, it's my number one favorite movie, and it has been since I probably saw it in 1978 or whenever the hell it came out. Most kids liked Star Wars back then, or E.T. I fell in love with Apocalypse Now. I'm the weirdo, right? But, this idea of Colonel Kurtz, who lives this extraordinary life, and he's upriver, and he's living with the mountain yards, and they're going out and doing all this stuff, and it seems to be working, right? Kill the right tax collector and chop off the right head and things, set themselves into order. So the fact that he was kind of writing this long-winded journal to his son, if he didn't return. So I journaled. So I'm like, okay, I want to have that tortured military experience. I want to be the guy with the background, the backstory, the guys, when I transition to law enforcement someday, like, Rich was in the Marines and he was in Operation X and Operation Y, and to have that backstory because if you look at like Lethal Weapon and some of the movies that were out in the 80s when I was a kid, everybody had that, right? The 80s action hero didn't become an action hero until he had already been vetted and tested in the military. So having said all that, I'm like, okay, I want to live the life that is going to be worthy of writing down someday. And that was kind of the jumping off point. But it was something that was always kind of on my mind. But life gets in the way. You raise a family, and then one day I'm just like, okay, well, the kids are all adults. I'm in a position financially where I can sit my ass down for a few months and bang this thing out. Let's do it.
And so you've been keeping a journal this whole time, and that's what you're referencing?
Yeah, I kept a journal. I kept a journal in combat. It was probably the first time that I really stuck to the day and day because we didn't know how long this was going to end or how it was going to go. So, and I didn't have children when I went to combat, so it was like I need to start writing something down. So it was easy to go back to that with my notes and then take my notes and juxtapose it relative to the Marine Corps Historical Foundation that puts out a publication on every combat thing. And kind of like, okay, this night I was here, this was going on. Okay, this all jives.
Okay.
Checks and balances, yeah. But the mechanics of writing, if you allow me one other thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I took literally I had just a sheet of paper and it stayed over where I keep my keys and wallet and everything. And I would, that would make a good story. And I would write down just a mental prompt, right? Okay. And then a day or two might go by and I'd write another one or another two. But anytime it popped in my head, I would just run over there and jot something down. So once I had about 30 of these, I'm like, okay. And it probably took me a year or so. Just as these things would randomly filter through my head, I'd write it down and then I would go back to the journal to get any kind of detail relative to those incidents. And then I kind of racked and stacked them because I'm a spreadsheet nerd in order, chronological order. But before that, and it's a bit unfair to say I'd never written anything. That's not true. I was actually a creative writing instructor in the Marine Corps. So there was a 501c3 company called MillSpeak where they teach veterans how to write creative nonfiction. And I attended several of their seminars, and finally at some point there was two other MFA instructors. They had Master of Fine Arts from Queen's University. And one of them was leaving. They're like, Rich, you want to step in here and help be an instructor? So we taught a 6-week program there at Marine Corps Air Station Beaufort. And so I had been published through them, and I had helped a lot of other writers write their memoir. And I'm like, okay, well, I kind of know the mechanics of it. I like the genre of memoir, and I like the idea of creative nonfiction. As you will, having read the book, you'll understand, there's this idea of the savage sommelier who applies varietals to each person as a means of doing the thing.
I like that style. It was interesting. And like I said, it's a really cool book. I mean, how long did it take you to write?
Probably no more than a month or two. I mean, to actually bang it out. But then the editing, as anybody who've ever written a book will tell you, it takes 2 and 3 times as long to edit it, especially because I'd considered of farming out the editing, go on Fiverr or some of these other things and hire an editor, but you were talking $2,000-$3,000 for the length of the book. And I'm like, okay, you're going to edit yourself. And I'd edited some of Seeklander's books for him. So I'd done some editing and knew how painful it was going to be. But I opted to do it myself using Grammarly and Hemingway, and there's some other things that can help you with those.
Yeah. And you had talked to me before about this, the DOD publishing, and like you had to get it cleared because certain things were sensitive. Can you talk about that process and also like the difficulties? And wasn't there a lawsuit going on with that right now? Not you,
there
but
is.
someone else.
Yeah, I ultimately chose not to go to the DOD. And for the simple fact that I had emailed them multiple times. I'd called them on the phone and nobody answers the phone. It goes straight to voicemail. So I'd left multiple voicemails, multiple emails. And at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. But what I did was, there's dozens and dozens of footnotes throughout the book. Anytime I'm referencing something, it's already it's unclassified. It's out in the mainstream, and I'll let the chips fall where they may. But I mean, at some point, I got to get on with my life because there's several instances where it's been years and years and years, and it's just a black box. You're like screaming in the wind. Where's my publication? This is how I'm going to make my money. And
it's so surprising that the government doesn't have like an efficient process for that. I mean, of all the things that they do efficiently,
I know, right? It's unbelievable, really.
Let's talk about the cover art. I know you talk about it in the book, but can you share the motivation for that?
Yeah, and again, it may only appeal to people of my age, but the military adventure magazines of the 70s and 80s, there was Gung Ho and Soldier Fortune, all this stuff. And that is what I had grown up on reading.
Yeah.
I mean, when other kids was reading Mad Magazine, I was reading Soldier Fortune, reading about the Bush War and Rhodesia and how the war in the Congo was going to be over before I could become a mercenary and get over there. So that was just kind of a throwback to that style.
I like it. When I first picked it up, I was like, "What is this?" I was like, "Oh, okay, that's the style." Especially when you described it in that portion of the book.
Yeah.
There's a character you talked about. I think his nickname was Prime Time. It was just cracking me up, and I don't know why, but just the way I was reading it, it reminds me of like if this person was going to be cast in a movie, it reminds me of like Jonah Hill. Like I feel like Jonah Hill would be that character.
That's exactly. I mean, looks a lot like him. I don't think he was quite as rotund as Jonah Hill,
Yeah,
but as far as Marine Lance Corporals go, he was a big boy,
yeah.
a really overweight guy. And I mean, the dude was unbelievable. And I've ran across a couple of characters like him. There's another one that sticks out in my mind. If I ever write the conclusion to On Violence and Varietals, the second half, you'll get introduced to somebody else who has that same level of charisma. Like they just are like an infestation, man. They could come into your town. They could come into your town, Taylor, and take it over. Like, is that in the mayor's office? What's going on over there?
Yeah, it just made me think of that character from War Dogs and Jonah Hill, and I was like, oh my gosh, that has to be what he looks like.
Yeah. And of course, his real name was let's say his last name was Prime. Okay. Cause I call him Prime Time.
Yeah.
It sounded with like Prime, but we called him PI Prime because the dude just took the Philippines over, and he's a Lance Corporal. He's got no rank. He's like 20 years old. But the dude literally carried everything you need to break into anything. And a company commander that knew he was a born thief and a charismatic one, like a cat burglar.
Yeah.
And if the company needed Humvee tires, I'm telling you, brother, new Humvee tires would show up from nowhere.
Tactical acquisition.
Oh, he was incredible. You definitely want to go to war with that guy. But what's funny? When we came back from Desert Storm, they made him as a Lance Corporal, like the battalion police sergeant, as a Lance Corporal, because you can't promote the guy because he's just unpromotable. He's overweight and he's got this cloud of he's a thief hanging over him.
Yeah.
But nobody can prove anything. But when we came back, we had all the right number of vehicles, but they belonged to somebody else because he had been stealing. I was like, wait a minute, we got 57 Humvees. I thought that's what we're supposed to, but none of the serial numbers match. And he's like, said come home with 57. We got them.
That's hilarious.
He was something else.
After the Marines, well, not after, because you went reserve status. When did you work for the Red Cross? Because I want to talk about a little bit of
yeah, after I retired. Yeah.
Okay.
That was after I retired fully. Yeah.
Can you talk about that? How you got into that and like what your role was within the Red Cross?
Sure, man. I was looking for kind of a part-time job that would give me something to do so I could get out of the house. I'm very blessed that Lisa and I had structured our finances and did some other things to get completely out of debt when we retired, right? And so I didn't have to work, and very, very blessed with that. So I'm kind of sitting around like, okay, well, what do I want to do? I applied to two jobs. One was to be a park ranger, a part-time park ranger up here in Cumberland County. And the other job was at Red Cross to manage 4 counties up here on the Cumberland Plateau. And I did the interview process with both. I accepted the job to the Red Cross. And then the next day I got the call from the park ranger service saying that I'd been accepted. And who knows how that would have gone. But anyway, initially it was 20 hours a week, and I was the disaster preparedness manager for 4 counties. And about 4 or 5 months later, it became, okay, Rich, you're doing a great job. So great, matter of fact, you're going to be in charge of the entire state. So my job was, the Red Cross divides itself into blue sky and gray sky activities. So blue sky activities is you're in the preparedness mode, right? The sun is out. What can we do to prepare for when the gray skies and the disaster befalls us? So in the blue sky environment, I was developing partnerships, working with government organizations, being a good productive liaison in that regard, helping with fundraising. I might go and give a speech to a group of ladies at a golf club or something like that. I also manage like the home fire preparedness campaign and the pillowcase campaign and some other things that teach kids preparedness. And then we had in the gray sky environment, in the actual disaster, then it's my job is now government operations.
Okay.
You know, yeah.
So in terms of like emergency preparedness and the type of advice you provide, like what type of advice would you provide on that to other people about emergency preparedness? And, there's a lot of people claiming to be subject matter experts on emergency preparedness right now, and there's a lot more awareness about that. Can you speak to that and the realities of that and what a realistic preparedness would look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, man. True emergency preparedness probably has to start with home fires. And I know it's boring and it's not sexy, but really that's what's going to kill you or your family or the dog, or it's going to cause you to lose your home. And, so I would start with home fire preparedness, have a great plan, check your smoke alarms, etc. Have a plan that you can enact and react to what's going on. Make sure your kids know what to do. Don't just sit up when the alarm goes off, because now you're going to inhale a lot of toxic smoke. You want to roll off the bed, get on your hands and feet, touch the back of the door with the back of your hand, all that kind of stuff that they should know. And if they don't, you need to get up on that. So I would start with that. Beyond that, I mean, we could talk about water, we could talk about food, but really creating and maintaining an artificial climate. And that's something I never hear anybody talk about. But in my experience, especially in winter-related disasters, to have a mother and a child freeze to death in 21st century America in a snow or ice event, it seems anathema, and yet it happens. I've seen it happen. We had an ice storm here; 31 people died. Yeah. And if you look at what killed what was the leading cause of these fatalities? It was not being able to heat your home when the power goes out. It was maybe you did have enough forethought, right, Taylor? And I'm going to get the generator. But then you put the generator in the carport next to the house, and carbon monoxide killed you and your family. So sliding off the roadway, was another thing. So if you look at what kills people and you kind of reverse plan from there, like, okay, nobody dies because they don't have enough food and water, okay? But you will die from generator type things, freezing to death. We had so much food and water. We run shelters. I can't tell you how many shelters I was responsible for during my time. And this leads into something else, if I could, because this is one of those myths like, oh, we're going to bug out, bro. We got a bug out bag. I got the bug out vehicle. Where are you going? Where are you going? Now, I'm not saying that there's never an opportunity to bug out, or you should never bug out. If there's a wildfire bearing down on your house, man, you probably need to bug out. You should have bugged out days ago, probably, because now anywhere you go is going to be treacherous. And if you don't have a chainsaw and a winch inside your truck to move debris out of the way, you may just be driving into your death. So, and a good set of leather gloves and iPro and all that kind of crap. Closed-toed shoes, Taylor. Closed-toed shoes.
Oh yeah, always. And laces and closed-toed shoes.
Thank you. Right. I can't say enough about that. But this idea of this bug out prepper mentality is nuts, right?
Yep.
99% of the time you need to be able to, you're bugging in.
Yep.
And if the idea is to bug in, what do you need to bug in, right?
Yeah. Well, you and I, we've been on Ruck Marches in the field with grown, fit, motivated, fighting age males. And that sucks. It sucks. I cannot imagine doing it with a family and kids and all the necessary hygiene supplies that go along with that. I mean, it's just, it'd be a nightmare.
Where are you going? Where are you
going? Where you're going, and then like on your way there, if you do have a place to go and you're gonna like bug out on the land, it's like good luck. Like how often do you practice rucking 16 miles, 25 miles with 45, 50, 60 pounds?
Yeah, it's foolish. I mean, it really is, and I'm sure somebody's gonna drop some hate in the comments. I'm just telling you, man, having ran shelters professionally, you don't want to end up in a shelter. But if you try to attempt to flee, you may find yourself in a shelter that you don't want to be in. And in those shelters, yes, you're going to find warmth and comfort, and you'll be out of the rain and food and some of the psychological aids that you or your kids might need. You're going to find nurses there, et cetera, but you're also going to be put to work. They may separate you and your family, your wife and kids are over here and the men are over here, and you're going to be doing a task if you're going to be staying in the shelter. Your pets may not be allowed in there. So there's 1,000 reasons why planning to bug in is the right thing to do. I'm going to live off the land. What are you talking about? What does that even look like?
Yeah.
When one of the disaster relief operations I worked in, we needed food, but trucks couldn't get in up here to the plateau to bring the food in. So literally, I'm going to break into high schools. Literally taking bolt cutters and shit. We're going to break into these high schools because the freezers aren't working in there and the food's going to spoil, or I can feed the community.
Yeah.
Now, of course, we reached out to the schools. In a lot of cases, we had someone, the superintendent or somebody, bring us keys so we could get in, a janitor or what have you. So we didn't really have to break in. But all the schools were like, hey, just give me a letter from the U.S. Department of Agriculture that says it's going to refill my freezers, man. You can have anything you want. So I was hooking and crooking, doing anything I could do to feed people. So food's not an issue. We set up supply points and brought in food and water from all over the place. And the Red Cross and the government organizations are really good about that localized 4 or 5 affected county area. But in the scenario that you and I are probably thinking about, where there's an attack on our power infrastructure, or there's some kind of electromagnetic pulse from a spy balloon, coronal mass ejection from a giant solar flare, some of these things that could knock us back to the Stone Age, man, good luck. And if you think you can live off the land, I don't know anybody that's prepared for that scenario.
I'm sure Primetime will be all right.
Oh, Primetime will be fine. You're holding Primetime's goods. I'm telling you right now.
Are there any resources for people to get started in that space, like just legitimate resources that will actually give you realistic information on what to prepare, how to prepare in terms of communication, link up with your family, what you just said, like, fire prepared, all that type of stuff?
Yeah, the Red Cross has a lot of really, really excellent free apps that are amazing. Highly encourage people to check those out. I mean, there's like pet first aid. There's hurricane and tornado apps and all kinds of stuff that'll alert you, and they've saved lives. They're amazing, and they're free. There's YouTube, which is free, but you get what you pay for, right?
Yeah.
Now, let me backtrack. On the American Warrior Society, we have a preparedness series where I walk you through putting a go bag together. What's in my go bag? But my go bag is not, I'm going to run out in the wilderness with it. It's what rides in my truck and can help me get home if I need to. So the plan is always get home.
Yeah.
Home is where I can defend this place. I have all the resources I could ever possibly need, and then some. So when you think of bug out bag, it's more of, 1 second after an EMP hits, the car ain't going anywhere. And I'm 18 miles from home. Let me put my 18-pound pack on my bag and start getting that way. Or at least I'm going to go to Walmart, take some cash, and buy a bicycle, and then bicycle my ass home. So there's lots of things that you can do, but most of them I haven't heard on any of these preparedness YouTube pages, because they haven't sit in meetings. I mean, when I was in the Red Cross, Ebola had just crossed the shores for the first time, and it had landed in a Texas hospital. So we were talking about a lot of the pandemic related things. And for those of you that are out there, if you are readers, I encourage you to read like The Hot Zone or The Demon in the Freezer or some of these other books, or Ted Koppel's amazing book, Lights Out, about what the vulnerabilities of our power grid and infrastructure there. But I think reading, whether you read fiction or the nonfiction that I've just laid out there, read something, because it will take you down these intellectual exercises of what does it really look like? What vulnerabilities do I have inside my home? Maybe you have a family member that is vulnerable in the sense that they're on insulin, or or what have you, right? You have pets, okay? We got to prepare for the pets too. The pets have medication needs. What are those? How much water are you going to really need, and where are you going to get the water from? Because every person in your family needs a gallon of water a day. That's 3 quarts for their drinking and 1 quart for hygiene purposes. So if I've got 5 people in my family, it's 5 gallons a day. We want to be able to self-sustain for 5 days. I need to have 25 gallons. And that's quite a bit, but that's just a bare minimum until they can maybe get the road cleaned up and you can get out and get some more bottled water. So, and then another thing is, well, people think, well, I'll go out and buy it when I need it. No, you won't. Because if you're in an affected area, I can tell you from experience, propane and kerosene are going to be the first to go because everybody needs it when the balloon goes up. Walmart got looted here on the Cumberland Plateau. And if you haven't seen the looted Walmart, you probably should, because it'll help you prepare. Because look what people are stealing, right, when they kick a door in. And it'll tell you how ready they are. And anyway.
Yeah, I like how you mentioned the fiction or nonfiction and fiction. I'm currently reading a book called Alas Babylon. Are you familiar?
No, huh?
It's a really old book, but it's one of the first books that talks about like a nuclear event that causes like a societal, like we had like exchange nuclear weapons with Russia, something, what that would look like, and the fallout from that, the legitimate, nuclear fallout, but then also the fallout from a socioeconomic perspective. And there's a lot of things in that book that it's amazing how aware that author was back then. And as far as I know, that was the first book of that time. Like they had Hatchet and books that really into like wilderness survival before that, but it was the first book where he gets into the surviving in an urban environment and the kind of unique challenges that come along with that.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because in my go bag, I have, if you've watched that series of videos, I've got everything to survive in an urban environment, whether that's, battery backup, charger, all this stuff to plug in to keep my devices running, water keys in case I'm in an urban environment. I can stick the key in there and turn the water on. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then you're already behind.
That's really smart.
Yeah, I've got all kinds of non-destructive breaching stuff. That's a whole other subset of skills. But I have one backpack and I've attended some locksmithing and breaching schools, non-destructive. And so I can get in and do what I need to do. And that might be finding shelter, right? If I'm moving from point A to point B, trying to get back to my house, I might need to get shelter inside of a building. How do I do that? So there's a whole lot to consider when it comes to this, especially in our age. It's interesting that book was around in the 50s, but think about how many modern conveniences we over-rely on today that weren't there in the 50s. And now they can really complicate things.
Were you affected by the recent AT&T outage? Do you have AT&T?
No, I don't.
Yeah. So we got, I think it was last week, got up, everything, normal day. My wife had to go to about 45 minutes away for some business meetings, and she got 3 minutes away and came back because she realized that the cell network was down. And so she grabbed the alternative phone we have, which is on a different network, and also made sure the radios in the car had tuned to local repeaters so that we can hit those, or at least be able to gather intel if something happens. But it was just another reminder of like how fragile everything is, and people just don't understand, like, especially with link up and communication. It's like, even if you only work 30 minutes away, that's a 30-minute drive. That's like probably a 3 or 4 hour walk. And if something happens, EMP, if your spouse is at work, you're at work, your kids are at school, having a pre-planned link up of where to go, alternative plans of communication, a pace plan, is so important. Because what if you leave and get home and your wife's or your spouse is not there, and then all of a sudden, like, well, you don't know, but they're like 15 minutes away, they're walking. And then you leave, and now they're at home, and they're like, "Where are they?" And so, just having that pre-planned is so important. Can you speak to that at all, and like how you go about that?
But you hit on something, and this is something the Red Cross has the means to do it. And I think there's the National Reunification Center or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But we have reunification plans. But I can only do that if you have a current photograph of them, and some information about them, and we can put it out there and try to link up. So in my go bag, I have, like a credit card with $50,000 on it. I've got a USB that has all of our documents on it. I've got, numbers written down, envelopes with stamps on it, checks. I mean, all kinds of stuff just beyond the normal. Like, I've got a compass and okay, God bless you. Good for you.
Yeah.
I've got an iPhone in there that's fully charged. So there's a whole lot of things that you can do ahead of time. Just it helps me sleep nights, if nothing else. And maybe again, the paranoia has to do with the life I have led, and maybe an urban soccer mom may not understand this, but you don't want it to be the time that you have to understand it in the middle of an actual event. It's going to be really, really bad for you, and you're going to suck up resources, because I'm telling you right now, when we do, like, every county in Tennessee has a trailer assigned to it, a sheltering trailer, right?
Yeah.
And every sheltering trailer only has like cots and stuff for like 150 people. And every town has tens of thousands of people. There are not enough resources for you. So I'm going to tell you right now, you need to be able to self-rescue, period. And most people are not, because the people that are going to come to the shelter, in my experience, are people that are very compromised, whether it's age or infirmary or some of these other things, and they're going to tax the resources of the community. It's going to be, we need to get grandma moved over there because she's on a ventilator. She's got all these issues. Now we've got multiple ambulances transferring her to the shelter where it's going to take round-the-clock care from nurses. The hospital's already full to capacity, and so often the shelter becomes kind of a bleed over for hospitals and things of this nature. So you're on your own, man, especially if it goes big. If it goes big, large power transformers, FEMA, it's not like FEMA has, I've got a couple of them. I can put them on a trailer and get them down there to you. There aren't any backup large power transformers. They're coming from China. They're going to take 18 months to build. And if they are the ones that attacked us with some sort of malware or cyber attack, they're not going to make any for us. So if things go that bad, it could be beyond just a few weeks, a few months. It could be a long, long time before any normalcy. So what does that mean? It means a breakdown in law and order. It means a breakdown in civility. It means supply chain disruption, which we already had a test run of what that looks like. And to the point about test runs, Taylor, I don't know if you saw this, Eric Prince was saying that he believes AT&T was a China test run.
I think I did see that somewhere where they thought it was a cybersecurity attack or a cyber attack.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Plan
wouldn't be surprised.
accordingly.
Yeah. Let's talk about self-defense some. What do you think is a commonly overlooked aspect of self-defense? You have a lot of experience training people in self-defense, a lot of experience in self-defense yourself. What's a commonly overlooked aspect? And answer that however you want. Fire extinguisher?
No, I mean, that's not a bad idea. What I would say is, and people are not going to like to hear this, fitness.
Yeah.
Fitness is the number one overlooked thing in our community, right? The gun community. And reality is, you're far more likely to die of a heart attack than you are of a jihadi or a gangbanger. It's just, let's play the averages here, guys. So with that being said, take care of yourself, because you're going to be the one that goes through the event. You, not the gadget or the gun or the truck or the house, what have you. It's you. And you don't want to be a liability on your family. I'm speaking to men out there, right? We should be able to guard, and govern our family through those events, not, look at Dad's down again. No. So take care of yourself. That's number one. Take care of yourself in whatever way you need to, because you want to be spiritually fit. You want to be physically fit. You want to be psychologically fit. It's not just physical fitness, although it's a part of it. And, having ran Spartan races and marathons myself and triathlons, in doing that and becoming more fit, you harden the mind and the body as well. So I think that is the number one overlooked thing in our community, in my opinion.
I agree. I completely agree. I like that and your previous answer, because once again, it's not the sexy answer that people expected, but it's doing what is, doing what is meaningful over what is expedient. And that is, I mean, physical fitness in a civilian capacity, law enforcement, military, there's a reason that, particularly like in the Marine Corps, for when you're applying for officer candidate school, that your physical fitness test is like one of the most, if not the most important factor, whether or not you get selected, because it just shows fundamentally, can this person lead themselves?
Yeah,
And now let's see what else they can do.
that's exactly right. Being at Parris Island for a while, I was the quality control officer, QCO of the 6th Marine Corps District. And what that meant was any kid that needed a waiver his packet had to come across my desk. And the first thing I looked at is we would give an initial strength test. So if you're an active duty Marine, you have to take a PFT, a physical fitness test, or a CFT, combat fitness test, every 6 months, right? Well, we don't give an applicant the full PFT or CFT. We give them the IST, the initial strength test, which is a 1.5 mile run, crunches, and pull-ups. The first thing I did, I'm looking at that IST because that's what we consider a green weight. What is their green weights? And I'm juggling how many green weights they have relative to the red weight, which is the tattoo or the drug use or the police involvement, something that is not what we're looking for. But if you're physically fit, I know we can kind of take that off the table. You're not going to struggle with that. But if you're overweight and you're fat and you have these other things, not a chance, man.
I agree. Going back to the self-defense, what's a common myth about firearms or firearms training that you would like to speak about, debunk, debate, whatever?
The myth is that gun grappling just does not happen. I think people are kind of getting on board a little bit more of that in our community, or maybe that's my own confirmation bias. It seems to be like the community's moving toward, yeah, this is a real thing, because we have so much video evidence. When I was a cop, we had 2 videos that we could look at of officers being killed in the line of duty. We had Constable Lunsford and State Trooper Mark Coates out of South Carolina. That was it. 2 videos. One was black and white, and one was in color. But and really that wasn't a whole lot. But now we have so much, and my good friend John Curry over at Active Self Protection has done a great job of really putting those out there and doing some analysis on the videos, and people can learn from them. But one of the things is handling yourself in an entanglement with a firearm, an edge weapon, or whatever that might be. You have to learn that skill, and it is difficult to learn. But just getting past the fact that, that doesn't happen, I'm going to be able to retain my weapon. Well, if you can't maintain custody of your firearm in entanglement, then you're just a holster for somebody that can. I mean, really, and that's something that people need to think about. And one of the things I do when somebody joins the American Warrior Society, they can do a 1-hour onboarding session telephonically with me. They
I'm sorry, your audio sounds like it sounds like it's muffled now. I don't know what happened.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now I can.
Okay. I think I moved back from it.
Okay.
What I was saying was
the onboarding for American Warrior Society.
Yeah.
You get
as a new member for American Warrior Society, we can do a 1-hour onboarding session. So one of the things that we talk to them about is, okay, you're a concealed carry holder, but maybe you haven't done combatives, or maybe you've done some sort of striking art when you were in high school or something. So, but you have no idea how to maintain custody of the firearm in an entanglement. So I will direct them to that module on our website and let them watch that, because I will tell you, man, about 7 or 8 years ago, Mike Seaclander and I were teaching a little bit of gun grappling at an NRA convention, and it was like we were handing out fire, man. I mean, people had no clue how to manage that and how to maintain your firearm and things of this nature. And it's so I think that is a very important skill for someone who carries a firearm.
I agree. Yeah, I think so too. And also for the people who do, if you could probably speak to this too, but for the people who do jiu-jitsu, it's very different doing just jiu-jitsu, either gi or no gi, and then actually having a knife or a gun involved in that situation. The dynamics completely change.
Yeah.
So even if you do know how to do those types of things, it still changes.
It does. It does. And, finding someone that's competent and knows what the hell they're doing out there is difficult. I always point people toward the ShivWorks collective, Craig Douglas and again, Cecil Burch and all those guys, Cliff Byerly, Cato. There's a lot of good trainers out there. Z. There's a lot of good guys that are out there doing the work. And, it doesn't take much. Just learn a few of the basics and then train on it with your partners. When I was a police officer, I was very fortunate that the place that I trained at, Naka Jiu-Jitsu, he was a former Marine. He was a retired police officer. So like he would do law enforcement only, where we'd come in all of our kit and grapple that way. And if you're not doing that, man, maybe you should. If you're in that line of work, you wear a plate carrier, some sort of soft body armor, and a gun belt, you need to be doing it in your equipment. And don't say that, well, it can't be done. Yeah, of course it can. If you're doing a hip escape right, yes, you could do a hip escape wearing your Safariland rig. It works, trust me.
If you could push a button and change what is done in law enforcement training, what would you want to happen? Head over to Mantis using my affiliate link below and grab one of their dry fire training devices. Their Blackbeard and Blackbeard X are specifically designed for the AR-15, and these devices allow you to practice dry fire without having to cycle the action after each shot because they automatically reset the trigger. And the Blackbeard X uses an accelerometer and Bluetooth to sync with the Mantis Laser Academy, and this can further analyze your shot groups to help work on your fundamentals. And if you use my affiliate link below in the description of the video, it'll help support the channel at no extra cost to you, which is awesome, especially when YouTube likes to demonetize channels like this. So thanks for your support, and let's get back to the video.
I don't know, because I was having this conversation with a buddy of mine just the other day who's an FTO with his department, field training officer. And I said, really what needs to be done right now, I don't know that it can be done. And what I mean by that is, and I'll give you a quick vignette. When I was a bouncer, we had a really bad fight, and it took all of us, and it took us longer than it should have to get them out the door and into the parking lot. And so the head of security, Tony Taylor, was this giant guy. I think I may talk about him in the book. Giant mountain of a guy, big black guy, bald head, gold earrings, great guy, former Marine also. And he was so pissed off because it took us so long. So the next night we come in, he's like, you're going to fight me for your jobs tonight before we ever open this club up. And I'm like, oh man, if you can't take me out of here, then you're gone. He goes, look, fellas, you need to understand something. He held up a 3 or 4 inch thick thing of applications, right? So he's like, everybody in 2nd Marine Division wants your job. I got my pick of jarheads. So if you can't do this job, you're out of here. So I think that kind of mentality where you're already at 100% staffing and everybody on the street wants your job, it's easy, right? Like I'm going to mandate this high level of training, and you're going to rise to this standard, or you're on the street, right? Selling women's shoes. You're out of here. But now, when you have most agencies that are operating at patrol is what I'm speaking to, not the other activities in law enforcement, but you're running patrol with 60%, 40%, 80% if you're lucky. Calls are going unanswered and things of this nature. It's hard to say, I'm going to wave a wand, rich as king for a day, and say that once a quarter you got a 1 week stand down and you're going to do nothing but shoot, train, grapple. We're going to do PT. We're going to, ring it out. Kind of like the Air Marshal program used to do back in the day. You'd fly for so many weeks and then you come back for a week and you just train your ass off. Shoot, fight, shoot, back in the airplane. Something along those lines I think would be important, and you're going to get the right person, but they have to be led, right? I mean, if the leadership is not on board, and that's what I have seen more often than not, that the leadership is just absolutely risk averse, and they think that training every single officer to at least a blue belt or a purple belt level of jiu-jitsu is only going to increase your use of force incidents. And what we have found is it decreases your use of force incidents. And when they do have a use of force incident, what I've seen is the damage to the suspect, the damage to the officers are very minimal, if non-existent. So same thing with shooting. If I'm a high-level shooter, and I like to think that I am reasonably a high-level shooter, been doing it for a long time, I know when to get on the trigger, when to get off the trigger. I know when to muzzle you, when to not muzzle. I know my capabilities with the firearm in my hand. So I'm apt to shoot less people. An acorn falling on a squad car is going to freak me out and be rolling around in somebody's yard screaming. I mean, we see what reducing the standards have done, I guess is what I'm getting at, Taylor. I would raise the standards. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think there's a conflict because, on one hand, like you said, you're staffing. It's like 60, 70, sometimes 50%. And then the question of, these standards sometimes that we expect of law enforcement, be it the recent Lakewood shooting or whatever the case may be, people expect a certain standard of response. And it's like, okay, you understand a lot of times to have the response that you want is going to cost a lot of money. And I don't think the taxpayers are willing to pay that, to be honest.
You get the law enforcement that you pay for.
Yeah.
And, if you're, let's go back to something, because you're a Christian, I'm a Christian. I think it's Gideon in the Bible when he's helping him choose the warriors. And he's like, watch the men as they drink water.
Yes, and which ones like kneel down or keep their heads up?
Yeah, they got their heads up.
Yep.
They're looking there, holding their staff here, drinking with their left hand. Their eyes are always. And they pick out like 300 or 400 and send thousands, tens of thousands back home. That right there is what I'm talking about. When I go to the range, and we still teach law enforcement officers across the country, and I've been doing that for going back to the 90s, but still do it today. I can see it on the range. Your gear is old and sloppy. Your weapon's not maintained correctly. The placement of your gear makes no sense other than administratively it's more comfortable for you, but for a tactical, it makes no sense. You're out of weight. Uniform looks like it just pulled it out of the dryer. Here's another big one. You take your earmuffs off and set them on your handgun.
I hate that.
And there you go. Or you don't want the magazine to hit the ground, so you stuff it back in your magazine pouch, even though it's empty. I mean, there's lots of little things like I can hear the Lord telling me, send this one home. This guy does not need to be in a patrol car, or he does not need to be in the back of an MRAP. This is not the right person. However, we're in such a position where calls got to get answered, man. What are we going to do? And it starts from the top down. I believe that Eric Holder and Obama had an opportunity when Mike Brown and some of these, Trayvon Martin and some of the other high profile shootings, to kind of combat the narrative of the police are bad and say, look, fellas, no. Let's look at the data. Because if you ask most liberal Americans, how many unarmed African-American men are being shot in this country each and every year? There'll be thousands.
Oh yeah.
It's a vast ocean of these men that are being hunted and killed by law enforcement. In reality, it's on average 8, 9. I mean, it's a single digit out of a country of 340 million people.
It's statistically zero.
It's exactly. It's statistically zero. So having said that, don't demonize and defund police. We need to elevate them, train them, equip them, put them in the areas where they can do the best for the community. There's so many great studies. I just had an interesting conversation this morning with Will Moravitz, Dr. Moravitz, who wrote the book, The Blue Divide, Race and Policing in America. And I'd already spoke to him before about his really well-written book, but we had a conversation about, I think his name is Roland Fryer, the Harvard professor. That wrote his. And he did the study, of course, as you and your audience may be well aware. And he was so biased himself as an African-American man, he threw the study out, even though he had dozens of research assistants working on it. I said, no, we're going to do it again. And they did it again. It came to the same conclusion. And the conclusion was that police officers are less likely, not more likely, to be in a use of force incident with not use of force particularly, but an officer involved shooting with an African-American or Hispanic.
Yep. Now, I do think one of the things in the study they found is they're less likely to be use of a deadly force, but more somehow they gauged the metric of like how rough they were. But even in that, I think it was the officers who matched the person's race or ethnicity were also more likely to be rough with that person.
Yeah.
As well. So I'll have to go back and I'll if I remember, I'll try to link the study in the show notes.
Yeah. I'm looking at my notes from having a discussion with him this morning because it's still in my feed here. And what he concluded was, we argue that this is from his report. We
Yeah.
argue that the patterns in the data are consistent with a model in which police officers are utility maximizers, a fraction of which have a preference for discrimination, who incur relatively high expected costs of officer-involved shootings. End quote. Now, if you ask yourself, what the hell is a utility maximizer? That's somebody who must forecast about the various possible outcomes that they will experience if they take this action. So what he's saying is they know if I'm a police officer, I'm involved in an officer-involved shooting with an African-American person, it's going to be looked at the local level, the city, the state, the DOJ's coming in, everybody's going to come in, and my life is going to be turned upside down, even if I cleared from the thing. I mean, Officer Darren Wilson had to change his name, right, and go hiding. We saw the same thing with George Zimmerman. George Zimmerman reached out to me after the Trayvon Martin shooting, and I tried to get him on the show, and he had just been cleared through the court, and he's like, "Man, I'm doing everything I can to try to get my life back." Whereas when I've had my personal friends that have been involved in an officer-involved shooting, I'll have a conversation with them, or one of their friends have been in, they'll be like, "Yeah, they're going to be okay, Rich. Don't worry." I'm like, "Oh, okay, Fred's going to be okay." Yeah, he shot a pregnant white female, so he's going to be good. I mean, I'm being a smart ass. But my point of saying that is if they're like, "Yeah, it's not looking good," he shot an African-American male. I'm like, "Oh man, here we go."
That's the first question that pops up in many people. I would suspect that's the first question that pops up in most people's head is, what was the race of the officer? What was the race of the person who was shot?
And that's unfortunate, man. The study found, again, this is Roland Fryer, and the name of the study was an empirical analysis of racial differences in police use of force. 23.8% less likely to shoot at blacks and 8.5% less likely to shoot at Hispanics than they were on whites. Now, to your point, were they more likely to use some form of lethal force prior to that? Absolutely. In order to gain compliance. But if that didn't work, they were not shooting. And here's the thing. It endangers officer safety, not just for them, but their partners. It endangers the community because I'm going to let him go. Hey, we'll catch him another day. And then next thing you know, he's killed someone else in the community. So it's not good for anybody.
Yeah, you're talking about poor leadership in police departments, and it made me think of this Sergeant Muffin Top that you talk about in your book. I could read the story here, but I kind of want you to talk about it, of what happened with the fight that was at the hospital, and you were called off, and can you go over that story and what happened?
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. So again, knowing who I was at that time, I'm 27 maybe. I'd already been a special operations and corrections, a close combat instructor in the Marine Corps. I had 10, 15 years in martial arts, had done fighting at tournaments and all this stuff. Been a bouncer. My whole life at that point had been combatives and shooting. I'd been a competitive shooter back in the 90s when nobody was doing it. So the call comes out that the security at the hospital is being attacked, right? And there needs somebody to respond. Well, the officer that was covering that zone was out on a DUI stop, so she was going to be really tied up for that for a while. And I think it was 2 or 3 men attacking 2 elderly security officers at the hospital. So literally, I'm Taylor, I'm maybe 300-400 yards away, if that, right? And I'm in my patrol car. I'm like, yeah, roger that, 152. I'll respond to it. And I go to pull into the dividing line was the highway. So I was turning into the hospital. So technically I would be 20 yards out of my zone. And the sergeant's like, Sergeant Muffin Top, negative 152. I'll handle it. Well, I knew that he was at the squad room taking a crap. So
10-7.
I knew yeah, exactly. 10-7 for those that understand. So he's like, no, negative, stay in your zone. So I back in across the road in the Coca-Cola bottling company. I got my binos and I'm just watching these poor, helpless old men. I mean, it could be my grandpa getting heel stomped in a parking lot, and I'm right here, a young, fit, capable guy. And just because I began protesting on the radio. I'm like, giving a play-by-play. What's going on? Roger that. I just 110. Just want to let you know this is 152. They're being heel stomped. Looks like they're unconscious. Yeah, I got it. I'll get there. So just because I had done that, the next day I get called in by the chief, and this was at night. I was third shift, and he says, just the fact that you tried to go out of your zone, and he said, I don't care if you see the officer's brains oozing onto the pavement. If a senior officer doesn't tell you to violate your zone integrity, you don't go. And I'm like, well, I'm out of here. I mean, and anyway, God bless anybody that stays in law enforcement, but I didn't see any kind of career for me there.
Yeah. You said here, after he said that to you, I gritted my teeth and replied, "Yes, sir." I knew then, at that very moment in the chief's office, that my time was over with this department. Any agency that cared more about sector integrity than it did, i.e. policies, than it did the safety of its officers wasn't worthy of my time. I knew I had to find another job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the whole reason of joining the Marine Corps is, I wanted to be a police officer. I thought that was going to be it, right? And I worked for two different agencies. One was really good. I enjoyed my time there. And then the other one was beyond terrible. And this seems to be the experience of most of my family and friends that have done law enforcement. They'll be in it for a while. They'll realize, oh my God, their policies are not aligned where they need to be aligned. I don't know of a nice way to say that.
Yeah. Let's pivot again. What do you think are the biggest external threats to our nation?
External threats, it really is just one thing. It's China. Yeah. I mean, that's a pretty easy one. Whether you look at the BRICS alliance that they've created with Brazil, Russia, India, China, the rise of the yuan and the renminbi, the fact that they've built their we used to talk about, but China doesn't even have a Navy. I mean, that was the thing we said 20 years ago. They don't even have a Navy. They got a little Coast Guard. Well, now they have a Navy. In a couple of years, it will vastly surpass what we have. And what they'll do with that, it's anyone's guess. But one of the things, if you look at, they're not building aircraft carriers. I think they have two, because they're not interested in projecting that power across oceans so much as they're building islands, right, that will serve as some sort of sea-based platform in and around the Taiwanese Strait. So it's just a matter of time before they take Taiwan. They have, the FBI has already said, they've got mountains of malware sitting on our electrical infrastructure. To what end? Our telecommunications infrastructure. Again, to what end? We have offshored our manufacturing capability where we don't make anything anymore. 98% of our we don't make shoes. Think about that for a minute. Every town used to have a town cobbler. And now 98% of our shoes are imported. That's a problem. So a war with China is the worst thing that could happen, and at the same time, probably the most likely course of action. The Marine Corps just completely restructured itself. It got rid of its tanks and a lot of other things because it sees a war with China, and they're gearing up to win that war. Now, why? Why care about Taiwan? They're going to retake Taiwan. If it's going to happen the next week, or is it going to happen 5 years or 20 years now? I don't know, but it will happen at some point. And why do we care? Well, because we don't make semiconductors. And TSMC, which is a Taiwanese semiconductor manufactures 60-70% of all the semiconductors. Some of the rest of them comes out. There you go. Every look at your desk for a second. Everything on my desk has a semiconductor in it, except for maybe this pencil. I mean, everything. This has a semiconductor in it.
This probably has headphones, everything.
100%. So we are over reliant on this, and for a whole host of reasons. Another really good book is Chip War. If you haven't read that, it's kind of sets a stage for how we got in this position where we're going to have to go to war over frickin' silicon chips, right? How did this happen? Well, there's a whole lot of reasons, incentives and disincentives that led to the mess that we're in right now, where we're going to have to fight over this little island off the coast of China, which would be really nice if we could just say, you're on your own, but we can't because we need them. And you can't just break ground on a new semiconductor manufacturing facility tomorrow and expect to be cranking out chips anytime in the near future.
Yeah.
The purity that needs to be in those semiconductor factories, I'll put it this way. In the book, it tells you 11 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Imagine how huge 11 Olympic-sized swimming pools. If there was one grain of sand in any one of those, that entire manufacturing facility would be destroyed. They're
That's
that level of
amazing.
purity. And there's
That
only
is
one.
amazing.
There's one company, a Dutch company, that makes the lithography machines. They have 100% market share that you need to build semiconductors. So we're in a mess. And that's why we're probably going to go to war with China. And China realizes that they've positioned themselves strategically beautifully, and they're continuing to make deals around the world. The Belt and Roads Initiative is anyway. It's a long-winded answer. It's China.
I think now is a prime time for them to do it because we're so taxed between Israel and Ukraine, and we only have basically there's 3 people in our government that manage that type of stuff. The president, obviously, which he's off doing whatever he's doing.
Eating ice cream or something. I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah. And then you have National Security Secretary, I think, is another one. And then I can't remember the third one. But the National Security Secretary is really the only one I think that I might be picking the wrong person. But essentially one person that manages those things and makes decisions. And that person is already overtaxed. Their bandwidth is spent on Israel and Ukraine. So adding a third variable to that, I don't see how we could do it.
No, and anytime we cut and run like we did in Afghanistan, I mean, it reminds me I was a little boy, and the teachers at my preschool had the TVs on, and we were watching the Fall of Saigon, and I'll never forget. And I was probably 5 years old at the time, but I never forget the women. They never turn the TV on during the day, especially not to the news. So when I'm watching the helicopters lift off in Saigon and stuff like that, and then we'd see the same exact scenario play out in Afghanistan. And people so desperate to get out of there, they're hanging on to C-5 Galaxies and falling to their deaths. And that debacle just shows what weak leadership we have. And to your point, Taylor, I think you're right. I think now there's never been a better time, and there may never be a better time for China to just go. And Eric Prince was saying that that's what China's doing. They're letting you know, hey, I can push a button. It ain't just AT&T. I can take the whole thing down with one button push. So when I go to Taiwan, you better just stay out of this one. And whether that is true or not, I don't know. But it makes geopolitical sense to think that they would do stuff like that. And they've got the chessboard aligned in such a way, they could let North Korea know that, hey, why don't you go across the border? I mean, that's essentially what happened, when Kim Jong-un's grandfather, when he went to Stalin, like, hey, I want to make a play to get my peninsula back. And finally they said, well, I'm not going to stand in your way. And China said, well, maybe we'll support you, maybe we won't. And they do it. So a few of those kind of nods and winks, he could play havoc with our response, and then they just take Taiwan. So it's a mess, and there's never been a better time, because if Trump gets back in office, I think he'll put that genie back in the bottle at least for another 4 years. And President Xi, I think he sees an opportunity with a weak leader.
Speaking of geopolitics, do you subscribe to anything like Peter Zehan says about the Chinese population disparities and the male and female and all that stuff?
Yeah, some of Zehan's conclusions I don't agree with, which is one of the reasons why I've never reached out to him. He'll make some really, really bold things.
Yeah, very, very bold.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah. He said something yesterday. It was Jack Carr was interviewing him, and I just turned it off. I wish I could remember, because it was just so out in left field. It was like, you're completely misjudged this, because yes, they have demographic challenges. The standard demographic model might look like a bell, right? Where you have, as ages are coming up, the elderly, and then you have, and they have a very, incorrect distribution relative to men and women and age distribution. So that's a problem with manufacturing. But I think AI is going to solve a lot of those problems. I really do. I mean, you could see jobs just evaporate overnight for a lot of these low-level functionaries. So I'm not that concerned with that. But I mean, again, if you go in and you wrap up Taiwan, you just got a lot more citizens too.
Yeah. Speaking of threats, what do you think is the biggest internal threat?
Internal is where I'm really like scares the crap out of me more than more than anything. I did an entire show on the internal thing. I think that internally it's trust in government and social institutions. You know, we used to have, if you go back to like 1962, prior to Kennedy being killed, trust in government, you know, was like 70-ish%, in excess of 70%. Now it's barely double digit. And it's only going one direction, down. So trust in the government, trust in social institutions, this idea of lawfare, where they have just openly and unapologetically attacked the 45th president of the United States. You know, in our entire history, no sitting president and no former president has ever been indicted. And here we see the 45th president has got 91 indictments, 91 felony indictments on him. So internally, the idea that we can weaponize openly. I mean, you know, you have a district attorney that says, "I vote for me, and I'm gonna go get this one American, right? I'm gonna use every tool at my disposal to attack him and persecute him." Election integrity. So all these internal problems manifesting themselves at one time. It isn't just one thing, right, Taylor? It's a constellation of problems. And where this goes really worries me more so than China or Russia or anything. I think internally is a bigger problem.
Yeah. Yeah, the past few years, the distrust in institutions, be it government, scientific, whatever, is, and you know, some of that is warranted, but I think a lot of times we have a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
And you know, talking about, we'll say, here we go, this video is going to get flagged, vaccines. You know, on one side, you know, if you're lockstep with the conservatives, the Republicans, you believe that your avatar would believe that COVID deaths were a joke and vaccine deaths are through the roof. And if you're lockstep with the Democrats, you believe the exact opposite, that COVID deaths were through the roof and vaccine deaths were non-existent. And that is so problematic. And like, you know, especially on the right, where now we have people that just don't even get vaccines at all. They don't get their kids any vaccines. And, you know, talking about the survival aspect, you know, emergency preparedness, it's like, yeah, don't get your kid a
measles for that.
Measles, thank you. Yeah, measles. It's like if everyone around, you know, there's no issue, you know, business as usual, there's no issue. But the moment there's like an emergency, good luck. Like, you're going to be like, wow, I wish I would have taken advantage of that 21st century science and given my kid a vaccine before this emergency happens.
Yeah. But, you know, to tie it together with distrust in science, you know, you have Anthony Fauci. The moment that he came out and said, well, yeah, I did kind of lie to the American people. I knew that masks would help, but at the same time, I knew that I didn't want to pull too hard on the supply chain because it would really impact healthcare communities and healthcare workers. We should have resigned. Okay, I understand that lie, as well intentioned as you thought it was at that moment, I have no trust in anything you're going to say. Yep. But nobody seems to be held accountable in the government, and that's part of the problem too, right? I mean, you had General Milley, who was the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff under Lloyd Austin, Secretary of Defense, and they let the fall of Afghanistan happen as tragically as it did. They left tens of billions of dollars of American treasure and American war power on the pavement for our enemies to use, and nobody's held accountable.
No
he gets
consequence.
to retire, and I'm sure he'll get a book deal.
Yeah.
But the most damning thing that come out that General Milley did, Bob Woodward in his book, I think Peril talks about it, and of course, and then he later affirmed that he did in fact say it, was that he told his counterpart in China, a four-star general. You're not in politics, brother. If Secretary Blinken wants to do it, a Secretary of State wants to reach out to his counterpart as a Secretary of State, you do your thing, brother. But a four-star general, you're just a pit bull on leash. And for him to say, yeah, I called my counterpart in China and told him, if we attack you, don't worry. I'm gonna call you and let you know. That to me is treason. I mean,
Yeah.
it is as treasonous as anything. And imagine, I have 4 children, 2 military-age sons, and I imagine them, being in an Amtrak going ashore headed toward Taipei City, and General Milley, meanwhile, is going, "Hey, the Marine's going to land at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning. Get ready." And then they are met by machine guns because this treasonous 4-star general has done this. So, yeah, and then no accountability.
Yeah,
None.
that's the craziest part. The government doing things, be it that or just audaciously trying to pass legislation like the Anti-Paramilitary Act of 2024. Like,
Right.
it's so in your face, antithetical to the First and Second Amendment, but yet they can even just try it and see if it sticks and have no repercussions whatsoever. When I was a police officer, when you were too, and if you just obviously violate someone's rights, like, good luck, you're
done.
You're going to court, then you're going to jail.
And my book, it's pretty. I tried to sanitize it as much as possible because I don't want some weaponized DA coming after me for a civil rights violation. Because if I say I cranked down the cuffs because I just saw him kill his little girl before I put him in a squad car, there's a little bit of, as a father of 2 daughters myself, that didn't happen, but I'm being hypothetical. And I cranked down the cuffs and I write about it. I could be an old man. They could come back, you just violated his civil rights.
There's no statute of limitations on that.
No statute of limitations on it. So, that lawfare is something we got to fix. And I don't know how you put the genie back in the bottle, because if you think that the next administration won't weaponize it against you, yeah, good luck with that. And I don't know how we solve that problem, but it's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, the political myopia is a big problem too, and everyone's happy when it's their guy doing it, and then the other guy's in office, and it's like, well, obviously he's going to take advantage of it, and you're not going to be happy with it. Like, there's a reason we have checks and balances in this country, and it's because the founding fathers knew the nature of man is that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Correct. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you what your solutions that you propose, but you just said I don't know if there are any, so...
Well, I have some, but if you elected me dictator for a day, I have some, but at the same time, would they ever get enacted? Probably not. But as an intellectual exercise, it's a holistic approach. You got to repeal the 16th Amendment, abolish the IRS, go back to a tariff form of financing the federal government. This is what we did prior to 1913. That would take care of a lot of stuff. Repeal the 17th Amendment, let the states elect their senators, and you would have senators that now care about their states and not getting reelected and things.
100%.
Stock trading, man, stopping politicians, lifetime ban on stock trading, stock and bond trading for politicians at any level. I don't care if you're on the school board at Rutherford County, Tennessee, or the governor of Tennessee. I don't care. You're never going to be able to trade stocks and bonds again. You can do a mutual fund just like the rest of us. Good luck. Term limits, secure the border. I mean, think about a congressman who can run indefinitely, but they're still 2-year terms. So immediately upon getting in, they immediately got to start raising money for that campaign because they're going to be up for re-election in a year. So give them a 4-year term. You can do 2 4-year terms and you're gone. Because if you look at the percentage of incumbencies that get reelected, it's 90% year in and year out. It might be 80% one year and 92% the next, but it's across the board, 90% incumbents get reelected. So there's no new blood coming in, and there's no term limit to limit them. So it creates a lot of problems. And you marry together no term limits and unlimited ability to do stock trades and having insider trading knowledge. No wonder you have people like Nancy Pelosi and the Biden family and the Clintons or the Obamas that that go into office, maybe they've got $500,000 in the bank and they leave and they're worth hundreds of millions and buying up Martha's Vineyard.
Sorry, good delivery. Something else I would add to that is I think tax day should be the day before election day.
Interesting.
And I was thinking the other day about taxes and like particularly business taxes. And with business taxes, I think you're a little bit more viscerally aware of like the taxes that you're paying because you can't just take it out. It's like when you're an employer or employee, they just take it out, right? They take it out of and you never really see it. And I think it distances you from what is actually happening. Yeah. I think we need to do away with that to where everyone has to budget and they have to either they put it away and then when tax day comes, here's your tax money. Now you physically take this and give it to the IRS instead of having the business give it to IRS. So that way it's like, here's your $30,000 that you're going to go give to the IRS tomorrow. Remember to vote.
Yeah. No, I think you're onto something. But again, with my plan, we just abolish IRS altogether.
There you go. That too.
And I used to, when I was a younger man, I mean, literally, this is something I've only come around to in the last couple of years, because I used to think people were crazy when they said that. What are you talking about? How in the hell does the government fund itself? Well, the answer to that is just look at history. Prior to 1913, the federal government functioned just fine. Well, how did they do that? They did it through tariffs and excise tax. Excise tax is the tax that you pay when you get cigarettes, when you get beer, these vice-related activities, or gas and things. Some of the usage tax, right? Then the other thing is tariffs. If you look at a graph of like what we used to do in tariffs, and then it just 1913 hit, and we don't do tariffs on other countries at all, hardly anymore. But that's how Congress used to control tariffs. Well, once Congress got the power to just run amok and tax the citizenry, we don't care about tariffs anymore. Let the executive branch play with them. No. I'm going to put that back on the table. You're going to do your job, and because what we're doing is we're creating an incentive for foreign companies against American companies, or we're creating an incentive for American companies to become foreign companies. And that's what happens when you just reduce tariffs, and you only had reduced tariffs when we started taxing our citizens. And if you look back in 1913, I think the first year we did income tax, I think it was like 73 million was collected. That's it. That's all they did. The tax code was 15 pages long, and they collected like 71 or 73 million dollars on the American citizens. Now it's in excess of $500 billion, and the tax code is well over 1,000 pages. So I say all that to say we're tax cattle. One of my friends said we're free range humans on a federal tax farm or something like that. But we got to get away. Got to get away from that, man. And there's a whole lot of reasons. We got to fix student loans, and I don't mean forgiveness. I mean we got to fix them, because that's destroying the wealth of a generation of people that made some poor financial decisions as young people. I'm not talking about forgiveness. I'm talking about I've got other things that you can do to work work it off. You're not going to get them forgiven, but there's so many things internally that are a problem. Again, I go back to it's a suite of issues. It's a constellation of problems. It's whatever. It's not onesie, twosie, man. We have allowed a festering problem, a multitude of problems, I should say.
So I believe solutions start with individual. And with that in mind, what advice would you give the person watching this right now?
That's a great point. And my friends and family have heard me say this many times. I would encourage anyone to read the book, The Psychology of Money, because you have to understand what is your relationship to money. Is your idea of money, well, I work to make more money, and then I want to grow that money. Okay, well, and then what? And some of my friends are like, well, what do you mean? To me, money is a source of freedom. Money gives me the ability to travel to Europe. Like next week, we're going to Albuquerque for a week, to visit our son, and the freedom to just come and go as I please buy the things I want to buy and enjoy the things I want to enjoy with the people that I want to do it with. Whereas I have other friends that, man, they work 80, 100 hours a week. They're my age. They're burning a candle at both ends, and they're just constantly like, I'm going to go look at this chalet I'm thinking about purchasing, or I've got this new boat. Well, you're a slave to your stuff. I'm not interested in that. So figure out what your relationship is to money. And then from that, figure out a plan when you want to be done, and then work that plan backwards. So to that end, it's like, when do you want to be retired? You know, are you working towards Social Security? Or are you working toward, man, at 45, I'm hitting the quick releases on this rucksack and I'm done. Me and my wife are going to have a good time. Okay, well, if that's it, then let's work that plan backwards. And if you work the plan backwards, then you say, well, I need to do these other things. I need to keep myself healthy. I don't need to take that student loan, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there are two things that it's easy to do, and maybe this is just because it just keeps us sane, but we compartmentalize death as a problem for our future self and retirement as a problem for our future self. And when you plan for those things, I think that your future self will thank you.
Yeah. I have a saying, man, I tell my kids all, take care of the future you. The things that Rich Brown does today is to set Rich Brown up tomorrow in a better place. And that's short term and long term, right? Whether that's getting the whole coffee pot ready so in the morning all I got to do is hit go, or set the timer, plug the phone in the night before, all these little things to set me up for success for tomorrow. Now, so I'm just constantly doing that, whether that's long range, long term planning, or short range goals. But then you have to execute. And this is where a lot of people, I think, Taylor, even the guys and gals that dream big and they plan big and everything, it's the execution sometimes falls short. And I get it. Life gets in the way. And your plan needs to have flexibility built into it. It's not an all or nothing thing, but I think you have to plan, prioritize, and ruthlessly execute.
I agree.
Because final thing, for the younger folks listening, I'm telling you right now, man, in my mind, I'm still 27. And I'm not. I'll be 55 this year. So the time really starts to accelerate the older you get. And you think you have, to your point, Taylor, you said you think this is a problem, that death is a problem for somebody else. It's a problem for you. It's a problem for all of us. It's coming. So live a life worthy of writing about, dream big, act boldly. One of the things, David Goggins, I like one of the things he said of, okay, we're going to go into this building. I got no problem kick the door and just rushing in, because I want to be the guy that, like, man, did you see Goggins? Whoa, that guy, bold, not timid. If we got one life, man. And I don't know, man. I think a lot of people just kind of go through life letting life happen to them instead of planning and executing.
Yeah. Don't be a non-player character, NPC.
That's right. Yeah, we used to say on marine recruiting, right before I would close on somebody, I was like, hey, man, look, there's three types of people in this world. Those that watch things happen, those that say, what the hell just happened, and those that make things happen. Which one do you want to be,
Yeah.
And I don't want to be the guys like, oh, what just happened? But so often than not, I see people like, I was talking to somebody the other day, they voted for Biden. I said, okay, well, how do you think that decision's played out? What do you think about what he's doing? And they're like, well, what do you mean? What are they doing? What's he doing? I'm like, you don't watch the news? I'm like, no, not at all. I'm like, literally. And I started going through the things. I'm like, they're like, oh my God. And I think, again, most people that are voting and interacting with us in society, they are NPCs. They don't have a clue, and I don't know what they're plugged into. Maybe it's a TikTok video or I don't know what it is. What's distracting them from the things that are important in life, whether that's your family, your community, your health and safety. It's not just big geopolitical things, because let's be honest, at the end of the day, I can't impact that and you can't either. I mean, we can vote, right? But with election integrity, what it is, I mean, does my vote even matter? That's a whole other thing. But I think we need to be civic minded. I think we need to be family focused. And anyway,
I agree. Well, this has been great. Before we get off, though, do you have anything you're currently working on? Any projects, books, or anything you'd like to share with the audience?
I do. I mentioned Justin Carroll earlier, a good friend of mine. We're putting together this thing called BSOC, Black Site Operators Course, where we're going to teach a lot of these skills. So if you go to therichbrown.com, you can follow me, or you can go to the American Warrior Society and follow us there to find out more about the Black Site Operators Course. So basically, it's everything you need to succeed in an urban environment when and if things go bad. So if that sounds cool to you, we may have a green side. We may have a green side course at some point, but right now we're really excited about doing the Black Site Operator course. Aside from that, I'm working on a children's book. Hopefully I have it out here in a few months, as well as I continue to teach and train our firearms instructor development course, which is me and Mike Seekleiner have put together.
And so the children's book is geared for Marines, right?
Yeah, it actually is. Yeah, it's an adult children's book, by the way.
Sorry to interrupt. So you and Mike are working on stuff over at American Warrior Society?
Yeah, we have the firearms instructor development course that we teach. You can find out more about that at shootingperformance.com. Most of our courses are law enforcement or military. However, every now and then we do an open enrollment firearms instructor development course. And we may be doing an online course through lawfare, the app. So if you haven't, it's kind of like Facebook for shooters. I don't know if you're on lawfare yet, but it's pretty new. Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. But again, I only get involved in things that I want to get involved in because I do realize life is precious, and I do enjoy spending time with my wife. We've been together since high school, and her and my 4 children are my life, and I will not let anything come in the way of that. So,
well, that's why I appreciate you being on the show so much today.
Well, Taylor, thank you for having me, and it's been an honor, man.
Well, real quick, you talked about some of them, but where can people find you? Can you go kind of through the list of kind of the link tree of where people can find you?
Yeah, we've had the podcast, The American Warrior Show. You can find it at theamericanwarriorshow.com. It's on iTunes, Google Play, wherever you find your podcasts. We've been out there for 10 years now. I presume we still are the number one self-defense podcast. So if you're interested in that kind of content, check us out there, as well as theamericanwarriorsociety.com. We have a membership-based program where you can get access to the training vault. We've got hundreds and hundreds of articles there. You can follow me on Facebook at the American Warrior Society, therichbrown.com. If you want to pick up a copy of my book, probably the easiest thing. You can find it anywhere you buy books. There you go. But if you want an autographed copy from yours truly, go to therichbrown.com.
Like this right here.
Like that. Look at that.
Well, Rich, I appreciate it, man. This has been great. I thank you so much for showing up, and this has been a great conversation, a lot of great information. Guys, thank you so much for watching, and as always, train to a higher standard.